The Penetrating Shot Rogue build is by far the best ranged option for the Rogue. This build feels so good and actually feels like the only Rogue build aside from Twisting Blades that's remotely competitive. I've made changes to this build and wanted to have an updated version for anyone looking to run Penetrating Shot. So to show you what the build is, we're using Penetrating Shot in conjunction with Trick Shot aspect to shoot Penetrating Shot through as many enemies as possible and get this massive extension of the ability. Before using Penetrating Shot, we're generating combo points with our basic skill of choice, activating our imbuement, and then firing it off. For anyone who saw my previous build, the only change I've made to this build for the skills is running Poison Trap instead of Death Trap. Poison Trap has just felt way more consistent in my testing, and it's the winning skill in my opinion to finish this build off. I've experimented with so many abilities for the final skill, but having the CC and utility from Poison Trap and the ability to reset our imbuement skills is just so nice to have. But for anyone who hasn't seen this build, here are the skills. So going into the skills, I decided for this video, I'm going to try to show it in game to see if this is helpful at all and maybe it's easier to follow along with. So just let me know if it is in the comments below. But anyways, we're going to go with Puncture for our basic skill here. The logic behind Puncture is, even though it's a closer range skill, I do want to apply my combo points fast, and Puncture shoots a lot faster than Forceful Arrow does, so it makes Puncture a nice ability to have. Anyway, I've taken Fundamental Puncture for the vulnerable application. You don't need this necessarily, it's just better than the other alternative. Then moving into the core skill, I'm going to take Penetrating Shot. My gloves here, you're going to see that I have 8 out of 5 in my character. My gloves here give me 3 extra ranks of Penetrating Shot. And just to answer this question for anyone who's curious, yes, if you do have extra points, you'll see here the scaling does get changed with the extra points. So the extra points do mean something, and your core skill is your primary damage source, so these 3 skill points are actually really valuable. Anyway, we're also going to take Improved Penetrating Shot. The reason for this is that we're not always casting this at full energy, so the Advanced Penetrating Shot rune isn't very consistent. Then, before we leave the core section, we're going to take 3 points into Stutter Step. Then moving on to the agility section, we're taking 3 points in weapon mastery for the stats, 1 point in concussive to capitalize on our poison trap knockdown. And then moving on to the subterfuge section, I'm personally running concealment. Now I do want to talk about some options here for the movement because I had a lot of questions about this last time. Just for anyone who does want to run concealment like I'm running, I'm taking subverting. So the skill that breaks stealth gives vulnerable stacks on the enemies. So what I normally do with this is if I'm using it offensively, which you shouldn't do, but if you want to, for example, I could run in with my stealth up and then I could put a poison trap down to apply vulnerable on everyone and also get that CC knock up to just take out a pack almost instantly. But if you wanted to run a different movement skill, you could absolutely run dash if you wanted to. My thing about dash with this build is it just doesn't feel right. Like, dash is really good for the application of discipline dash for this dazed effect. The Twisting Blade build runs this, for example. Dash doesn't feel like it fits super well, but again, to each their own, and if you want to run it, feel free. Then for caltraps, if you want to run this is another option for your movement skill slot. The only downside about this compared to concealment is you're not going to have an unstoppable, same with dash. But if you do want to run caltraps, you're going to go with discipline caltraps for the crit chance. Then you could also absolutely run Shadow Step. This feels a little bit more finicky to me, and especially from the fact that we're a ranged build, it can be awkward when you're trying to position if this is your only movement skill. But if you did want to run this, you would take Enhanced and then Methodical Shadow Step. But now that we've talked about the movement options, let's go back to the subterfuge section really quick. So we are running Poison Trap in this build. This has changed from I was recommending Death Trap in my previous build. I was also talking about using Rain of Arrows. I found Poison Trap to just be much better as an option for us here. The reason is, as you can see with the modifiers here, Poison Trap has a 30% chance to reset our imbuement skill cooldowns, which is massive. And then also on top of that, as an added plus, we get a knockdown for 1.7 seconds whenever it activates, which allows us to benefit from concussive. And the CC is just really nice for this build because rogues were not generally very tanky, so any CC is a plus for me. Anyway, for enhancements, we're taking Enhanced Poison Trap and then countering for that 30% chance to reset our imbuement skill cooldown. This is just really nice to make sure we have maximum uptime on both of our imbuement skills. Moving on to the imbuement skills, we're running 3 points into precision. It's kind of a no-brainer. We're running 2 of them, so this is just a flat 9% crit strike chance, basically. Then we're taking Shadow Crash to spec into Consuming Shadows. I do want to highlight in this build, I am running Edge Masters, and this is a very important aspect for this build. So any way we can get energy back is really nice to ensure that we're always trying to attack with the maximum resource possible. But don't worry, I'll go more into the aspects later. Let's go back into the skills. So as you can see here, we're running Shadow Imbuement and Poison Imbuement. For Shadow Imbuement, we are taking Enhanced Shadow Imbuement and Blended. Then for Poison Imbuement, we're taking Enhanced and then Blended. The reason I'm running Blended Poison Imbuement is because I have pretty high crit strike chance with my gear. Anyway, then for the ultimate, we're going to be taking 2 points in innervation. Like I said before, we want as many chances to get energy back. And then we're taking adrenaline rush and 3 points in haste. Haste is a very nice quality of life passive to have, and I love running it. And then finally for our passive, we're going to be taking precision. So now that we've talked about the skills, we have to talk about the Paragon board. We're going to start obviously on the starter board. We're going to go snake up to the right for prime. This 20% damage is really nice. Also, the maximum life is nothing to laugh at. Then we're going to snake up and we're going to get the glyph socket. For my first glyph socket, I put in combat. Combat's really nice because we want any chance to get energy back, like I said. Also, the crit strike damage on our core skill is amazing. Make sure also here, if you do put combat in your first node, that you're grabbing these extra intelligence nodes to get 25 out of 25 to get the extra benefit. Then I snaked my way up. I grabbed this magic node for 5% damage. You don't have to snake up, but 5% damage is amazing. Then I snaked my way up, got the skillful node for more damage. Went up to my next board, and my next board that I went with is Eldritch Bounty. This board is really nice because a lot of our damage, I'm going to be honest here, all of our damage is dependent on our imbuement skills. That's why we're running things like Poison Trap, and we're trying to make sure we're managing our cooldowns on our imbuement skills really well. This board is a no-brainer, and it complements our build so well. I've gone and snaked my way to the left to get the Imbuer node. You should also grab this non-physical damage node. I've actually respec'd this board so I could show you my next board, but this point would actually go here for now. But anyway, just commenting on that. Then I'm going to snake my way up, going to grab the non-physical damage and the imbued skill damage nodes, go up for Eldritch Bounty, then snake my way up, and we get the Ready Supply node. We want the Ready Supply node because non-physical damage essentially is damage for our imbuement skills because that's non-physical damage. You also want to make sure you're grabbing all the non-physical damage nodes around it. Then we're going up to the right and we're going to get the glyph socket where I put in Efficacy. Efficacy is a no-brainer because this build relies all on our imbuement skill damage. Then I went up and I got the Potent node for the imbued skill damage. Now, I do want to mention something here of why you also want to make sure you're putting Efficacy here. So you see here what Efficacy does. It grants a 95% bonus to all rare nodes within range. And since Potent is the node here, it's making this Potent node, funny enough, much more potent and amplifying that imbued skill damage. Just to show you what it would be without Efficacy, I'm going to take that out, and you see this is only 30% and 10 dexterity. Then I put Efficacy in, and that's amplifying the damage of this node almost double. But anyway, then we're going to snake up to the next board, and my next board that I went with is the Cunning Stratagem board. Now, this node we don't actually need to get. You definitely can if you want to. You can rotate the board in a way that lets you get this, but the most important thing with where my Paragon points are right now, at level 81, I wanted to make sure that I'm getting this glyph socket to put Exploit in as soon as possible. Exploit is a very important glyph for this build. But anyway, let's go back through the board before we get ahead of ourselves here. So we're going to snake up the board here. We're going to go up left. We're going to grab the Fundamentals node for the 10% damage. Anyway, then we're going to snake our way up to the left, and like I said, we're going to get that glyph socket node to put in Exploit. Now, I do want to note you really want to make sure you're benefiting from the 25 out of 25 requirement from this node so you actually get the vulnerable edition. This glyph is really good for us because almost every time we're attacking an enemy, they're dying from one of our first few skills we're using on them. So what this node means is we're basically having almost 100% uptime on the vulnerable debuff as long as you're geared enough to be doing the content that you are doing. Anyway, before we leave, I also decided to go up here to get the finisher node to get the core skill damage. Again, penetrating shot is our core skill and it's all of our damage. And then finally, I snaked my way to the left. I grabbed the Lawless node along the way for the extra armor. And I've snaked my way to the left to get my next board. And this board, I do want to mention, I'm experimenting with this board, so keep this in mind. But the board that I've decided to run right away is Exploit Weakness. This buff seems really good to kind of shore up some of the problems we have with fighting bosses. This build's pretty good for fighting bosses if they're at your level, but if you're fighting like a really strong boss, like let's say you run into the Butcher in a Nightmare dungeon, or let's say you're doing one of the more annoying dungeons, like you're fighting Den Mother or some of these bosses that can just be kind of annoying, the Exploit Weakness rune is basically going to make it so where we can do up to 15% extra damage to them. Also, I do have a theory for how I plan to go with my nodes, so if you would want to see a D4 planner with just my Paragon points, feel free to ask me in the comments below. So now that we talked about the skills and the Paragon board, I'm going to really quickly run you through my gear here. If you can find a Harlequin crest, that is the best in slot helmet for this build. I haven't been able to get one. I've been farming my butt off, but haven't been lucky to find one. So you would actually move the aspect of disobedience to your chest, and you would move the adventurer's rune to your pants, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter which order you imprint them in. Both of these slots are your defensive aspects. But what I'm wearing right now is a very attainable version of the build, so feel free to just follow the build I have. I'm doing completely fine with it. Just keep in mind that the best in slot version of this build does have the Harlequin crest. Anyway, then for my chest piece, like I said before, I have the adventurer's might tunic. You can see here I've opted in to roll for imbuement skill damage. Again, your chest chest piece, generally speaking, you do want to run defensives with this, but I'm waiting until I find a better chest that has more defensive values caked into it. This chest didn't roll the best, and I did happen to find imbuement skill damage on my first roll at the occultist, so I decided to go with this chest. Then for my gloves, I'm going with the rapid aspect. The rapid aspect is really important because our basic skill here with puncture, for example, and this is even more important if you're deciding to run something like forceful arrow with fundamental forceful arrow. Because we're needing to generate combo points and we have a lot of gear that are dependent on combo points, this aspect makes sure that we can use our basic skill as often as possible to generate those points. Anyway, for some stats on this piece of gear, I've gone with attack speed, ranks in penetrating shot, critical strike chance. The only thing I would like to change about these gloves is I would change the lucky hit I have there to get my primary resource back. I would change that to imbued skill crit damage. In my opinion, your pants should be all defensive focused. Right now I have the increased potion capacity. That's not what I want, but these pants sadly got really expensive to roll. So for our boots, we're running the Penitent Greaves. Now, unfortunately, if you are running a unique, you can't actually reroll any of the stats there, so these are predetermined. But if you didn't want to run these and you wanted to run a different aspect on your boots, for example, maybe a utility aspect of your choice, you would want to make sure you have on your boots resource regeneration to make sure that you can stay at the maximum energy possible. Then for the bow here, I went with Edgemaster's aspect. This aspect is very important to make sure you can actually play the build. So you'll notice here what it says, skills deal up to 36% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast. So basically, if I'm able to keep my energy at 121 out of 121, I'm going to be getting that maximum benefit of 36% increased damage on my skill. And since we aren't spamming penetrating shot and we're generating 3 combo points in between each shot, you almost always are able to keep your energy near maximum. So you're always getting that benefit of this 36% increased damage. And that's why this aspect is so good and you want to put it on your crossbow for the increased percentage. I also want to mention if you're running this build, you should be running a crossbow for the vulnerable damage guaranteed slot there. Because again, like I said, we're not shooting penetrating shot that often. We're using combo points and then shooting it periodically. So we don't need the extra attacks per second. Anyway, for the secondary properties on your crossbow, ideally you would want crit strike damage, vulnerable damage. Dexterity's fine. I happen to roll dexterity. This bow got too expensive to reroll again. It's at like 12 million for my next reroll. But for the 4th slot, I would actually want core skill damage instead of basic skill damage. So I don't have a best in slot crossbow by any means. Anyway, then for our dagger, we're going to be running Condemnation. Condemnation is really good because we are using combo points. You can see I think it's so good that I'm running a sacred one, even though all the rest of my gear is like 800 eye level plus. But anyway, for Condemnation, you can't change any of these stats. So if you do end up going with this dagger, you're stuck with these stats. Then you can see for my sword here, I have crit strike damage guaranteed. Then I have basic skill damage, dexterity, core skill damage, and vulnerable damage. Then for my jewelry, on my first ring, I am running crit strike chance, poison damage, damage to distant enemies, and shadow damage. Now, ideally, you would have vulnerable damage on your ring. I haven't been lucky enough to get it so far. Then for the next piece, we're running Ring of Corruption. You can see here again, I have vulnerable damage, crit strike chance, crit strike damage, and damage to CC'd enemies. Ideally, the damage to CC'd enemies would be something like extra resource generation, or we'd want some imbued skill damage, imbued skill cooldown, whatever you can find. And then for my amulet, I'm running Trick Shot. You want to put your Trick Shot on your amulet because your amulet does get increased percentages. You can see, for example, with an aspect I have pulled out right now, this ranges from 10 to 25%, but since I have this on my amulet, that goes higher. Anyway, for amulet slots, my amulet is not best in slot by any means, but I have marksman skill damage, damage reduction from distant enemies, crit strike chance against injured enemies, and then imbuement skill cooldown. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to take a second to thank you for all the support I've been receiving in the short time that I've been making videos. It's making me so motivated to keep posting content and getting better at structuring these videos and putting more work into the post-production. But anyway, my name has been Valued. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.